moving on to our little superstar from the council conference. So we've got Sinenhlanhla Ntuli, and she's presenting on quantity surveyors' ethical behaviour.
Thank you. Good afternoon once again, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sinenhlanhla Ntuli, as Professor Crafford has stated. As you may know, there are a number of unethical behaviours going on in our country, from fraud, collusion, corruption, just to name a few, especially within the construction industry and the various professionals involved. For the purpose of this presentation, we will focus on the quantity surveyor's ethical behaviour. Ethical issues arise in the application of one's specialist knowledge in the delivery of a professional service. Unfortunately, there are a number of construction professionals that have been involved in cases of unethical behaviour, from incidences of rigging of over 300 projects and yet penalised for just 145 of those projects. In essence, we need to do away with the just don't get caught mentality, as this can subsequently undermine the integrity of the profession that encompasses the quantity surveying the construction industry. Therefore, it is vital that the reputation of the professional is seen to incorporate a strict ethical code and the highest working standards in their profession. To attain the objectives needed for the paper, these objectives were devised to firstly determine the professional quantity surveyor's perception of the ethical standards, the perception of elements affecting ethical decision making, as well as the attitudes towards certain ethical dilemmas. Dr. Chris McDonald defines ethics as being the critical structure of examinations of how we are to behave, how we are to constrain the pursuit of self-interest when actions affect others. This can be seen as to how professionalism is slowly correlated to ethics. It argues that it is the practices within the profession that determines whether rules and standards are used as facades for self-interest or for genuine moral purpose. The general rules principles for a professional is to not harm, always telling the truth, not to steal, as well as respect for persons. Professional ethics is a system of norms that deal with both the morality as well as the behavior of the professionals in their day-to-day practices. A professional person is someone who commits to behaving ethically to protect the interest of the public, and it's the acceptability of abstract standard behavior against practical tasks. Therefore, a profession is not just an ordinary job. It's a career, and much like any profession, the quantity surveyor is governed by a code of conduct as prescribed by the SACQSP, and this code of conduct is a starting point for disciplinary proceedings. There are a number of attributes of which the council could enforce but are not limited to the following: competency, integrity, public consideration, as well as consideration for the environment, because the quantity surveyor is to adhere to an ethical standard of business practice and to conduct themselves with independence, integrity, and fairness towards the public, their clients, as well as to their professionals, all of which are a conscious decision that have to be made by the quantity surveyor. Ethical decision-making, therefore, is a process in which the QS, you will use their moral base to distinguish whether or not a certain issue is either right or wrong. Ethical behavior is more than just the legal requirements placed on the quantity surveying profession, as it will concern the discretionary decisions and behavior. Basically, in light terms, it's what the sole quantity surveyor chooses to rather than what he is forced to do. And there are a number of ethical rules and principles that are applied when one is required to make a decision. And in order to make an ethical decision, there's a 9-step process in which one could follow. Firstly, to identify if there's a problem. Secondly, to determine whether there's an ethical issue. Then identify and rank value and the principles. Gathering the information. Review of the code of ethics. Considering the various alternatives. Making a decision. Acting and implementing on the decision that is made. And then reviewing the action. And in order for any professional to implement an effective ethical decision-making process, a solid ethics foundation has to be cast in order to cement an everlasting ethical ethos. This is when ethics education comes into play, as it can be implemented, as it will create a steady framework to building a personal and professional success of an individual. Education in ethics, therefore, could start primarily of what we learn at home, at church, and basically at school, as ethical knowledge is the fundamental substructure of a sustainable society. It could then be practiced in the university level and within the workplace. Because ethics education is important, therefore, in order to improve the professional standards, there's a need to foster an ethical culture through enhancing ethics on education, not only for the quantity surveying students, but also including ethics training for the practitioners. Because ethics training will assist in identifying the ethical consideration for our decision, as well as will introduce a high ethical standards in our everyday life. Because ethics training is indispensable due to one action ultimately reflecting on the entire business, and therefore the essence of one's ethical behavior will often go unchecked. For the methodology, the data was obtained through a web-based survey questionnaire which included closed-based as well as open-based questions. The sample comprised of quantity surveyors, of whom were sent the emails with the cover letter as well as the link to complete the questionnaire. A descriptive statistics analysis was employed to analyze and categorize the data. The questionnaire design included a 3-part questionnaire, firstly being the demographic information. Secondly, it was a 3-section in which to investigate the ethical perceptions as well as the elements affecting ethical decision-making. And the third part were case studies. With regards to the response rates, 350 emails were sent out, of which only 290 were delivered, receiving a response of just only 62, resulting in a 21.38% response rate. The first part of the questionnaire, which was the demographic information, from the gender profile of the respondents, 79% were male and 21% were female. Looking at the experience of practicing as a quantity surveyor, majority of the respondents had more than 20 years experience practicing, and looking from the 10 years and more experience, 79% of the respondents had 10 years experience practicing as quantity surveying in the industry. Looking at the positions in the organization by the respondents overall, 98% are actually registered as professional quantity surveyors. The second part of the questionnaire, which involved those 3 sections, this being the first section, was merely about professional quantity surveyors' perception on whether ethical standards have been declining over the past 10 years. 57% of the respondents perceived that there hasn't been a decline, while 43% perceived that there has been a decline. And then further on, we'll look at 2 responses from the 43% who perceived the decline within the ethical standards. The first respondent stated that it was due to a number of young people entering into the field because they could qualify and that the profession was in demand, and therefore not performing ethically due to their first reason of entering into the profession were not for the love of the job but rather for financial gains. The second response stated that there are a number of people are compromising their standards for money, and mostly due to the scarcity of work, and more people practice within the industry without proper qualification. The second section involved the ranking of the level of importance when resolving ethical dilemmas in practice using a scale of 1 to 7, 1 being not that important and 7 being of utmost importance. And there an average mean score was calculated. These were the top 3 ranked, of which the first rank, the respondents stated that they would seek some form of justice, would be their decision when resolving ethical dilemmas. And in the second rank, the respondents stated that they would first assess the moral problem and use their moral base to distinguish whether or not there was an issue. The issue was either right or wrong. Then the third rank, prior to making a decision when resolving ethical dilemmas, the respondents thought of an effect in which a decision taken will have on their personal reputation and career. These were the bottom 3 ranked, of which were least favorable among the respondents, which revealed that they believe that equitable distribution, self-interest, and obligation are ethical concepts that are less likely or lost in line in consideration by the quantity surveyor when facing ethical dilemmas. The third section was an attempt to reveal the extent of importance in the role players affecting quantity surveyors in ethical dilemmas. Of these were the top two ranked, being the client and the company, which were the influential factors in the ethical decision-making process. From these top two, it can be seen as the most instrumental in any project, as client satisfaction especially is critical to the business success. The third part of the questionnaire were the case study, which were used to gauge an impartial feelings, perception, and honest opinions about the ethical dilemmas. The first case study provided a fictional case whereby a site foreman uncovers unrecorded records of absenteeism of which he wasn't aware. Also within the scenario, it seems that his immediate subordinates had some form of knowledge of these unethical dealings, but it wasn't confirmed. Therefore, the respondents were required to state as to how they would respond under similar conditions where they had the option to either disclose the discovery to the superior, or how they would address the involved parties, both the culprits and the subordinates responsible for the work logs. The response was that they would take some form of disciplinary action, further investigation, immediately report to superior their discovery ahead of an investigation, which were the most common amongst the respondents, which shows that the respondents preferred a rather lenient and conservative approach to dealing with ethical issues, as opposed to sending out written warnings and termination of employment of those involved, of which was least common among the respondents. The second case study involved Jonathan, a surveyor who was requested to assume additional work on top of his already overextended schedule, of which he then declines, only for the work to be subcontracted externally to his acquaintance, who therefore requests from Jonathan to assist him, and of which he would be compensated for the work. The dilemma presented itself on whether the respondents would either accept the additional work from the employer without any form of payment, or either decline, or if he will accept the offer from the acquaintance, including some form of payment, and lastly, if he would disclose to his employer the additional work requested by the acquaintance and if he would accept the work or not. The respondents then stated that half of them said that they would decline the work from both the employer as well from the acquaintance. Then the other half stated that they would accept the additional work from either the employer or the acquaintance. However, that they'll negotiate the extent and magnitude of the work that they would assume and the potential remuneration for the overtime expended. In conclusion, the level of ethical standards have been at a state of stagnation or gradual increase, closely attributed to the increases in corporate governance and the ethical requirements by the general public. The results also indicate a positive relationships of elements, being the client and the company, putting them first before anything else is a priority when faced with ethical dilemmas. Although also it's uncertain that the findings, the extent and measure of the correspondence with the current code of conduct, the implementation and regulation thereof by the council still remains unknown, and perhaps provide an opportunity for further study. The results from the study also suggest that certain concern around ethics that remain can be attributed to the lack of education and training at qualification level, along with the misguided priorities of choosing to enter into the quantity surveying profession. As several respondents also stated that from their experience, cases of unethical conduct often involved unqualified or unregistered practices. Therefore, one must ask themselves what truly defines and drives them, because we do not need people who do not have the ability to do what is right. In recommendation, therefore, the Council should establish an ethics board or committee as a separate entity, of which on its own accord could regulate, investigate, as well as audit quantity surveying practices and practitioners on an annual basis. The Council should also enforce a basic foundation of ethics education for quantity surveying students at a tertiary level, as ethics is not offered in an institution currently offering the quantity surveying program, as it will essentially form part of the theoretical training for dealing with the ethical dilemmas. And also considering the respondents received, they're not sufficient enough to introduce a holistic review of the ethical perception in the country, as well as to substantiate such a calibrated profession. Therefore, the extent to which the quantity surveying ethics and standards thereof have to be scrutinized in the public, has been scrutinized in the public, and indicates a need for further investigation. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's nice. Kathy?
Absolutely nothing from here. It was as good as the first time. Well-deserved awards at the recent conference.
Thank you.
Connie? Roy?
We've discussed the code of conduct in your
I will discuss it on my thesis and add it as an appendix as well.
Janita?
Just a little background information. I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but have you investigated how many cases have been reported to the council over a certain period of time?
No, but there was a document that Professor Crafford that sent me. I can't find it on my laptop, that showed like cases of what happened to those people that acted unethically, basically. But it wasn't like a story of what really happened, but normally what happened to them, like paying fines and removing them from the profession and stuff.
It would just be interesting to know over the past 5 years this amount of cases have been investigated.
Thank you, ma'am.
Professor LaRue? Sure. Chris?
Did you address society in terms of what they deem to be ethical? You had that diagram there with home, church, the society in general, in terms of how that has a bearing.
No, I
didn't. Seem
didn't.
to be ethical.
I didn't look at society in general. I'll create a questionnaire for them to fill in. But I didn't look at that side.
Because it has an impact,
Yeah.
Of, companies that are prepared to use QSs are not registered or not qualified. And how that tarnishes the reputation of the profession.
Okay. Other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.